net zero is not a good idea, that it is wrecking the economy, it's wrecking our society, and it has essentially been a catastrophic mistake. The longer term question then is, okay, how do we get back to cheap electricity? I mean, you're talking societal breakdown. It's quite scary.
I'm Jasmine Birtles, and today I'm going to be speaking to Andrew Montford, who is Director of Net Zero Watch. Andrew, hello.
Hello.
Great to have you on, Andrew. Could you, first of all, just explain what Net Zero Watch is?
Net Zero Watch is a campaigning organization. We're very small, but quite well established. We were spun out of another organization called the Global Warming Policy Foundation, which was set up in 2009 by Nigel Lawson, Lord Lawson, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, um, as a body to start asking questions about climate change, because he and some friends felt that there was a steamroller effect going on, and important questions were not being asked. Now, several years on from that, the Greens started complaining to the Charities Commission about the Global Warming Policy Foundation, which was a charity. And there was essentially a campaign which ran for many years of complaint after complaint after complaint. And eventually it was decided the best thing to do was to spin out a separate campaigning organization. So that's what Net Zero Watch is now. We are now, in fact, completely separate from the Global Warming Policy Foundation. We have, our own staff, our own offices, our own funding streams. And what we do is try to get the word out that net zero is not a good idea, that it is wrecking the economy, it's wrecking our society, and it has essentially been a catastrophic mistake.
And how are things going? Are you being listened to? Because as you say, there's been an absolute roller coaster. Well, not roller coaster. The whole green net zero agenda has just gone over everything. It seems sort of unstoppable. But are people listening to what you're having to say?
Um, in recent months, yes. Essentially, for the first 10, 12, 13 years of our existence, it was virtually impossible. The global warming movement essentially morphed into something of a cult, and they would not let anybody say anything that went against the dogma. So essentially, we were banned from pretty much all mainstream television. Most newspapers wouldn't touch us, and as soon as we got IPSO, the press complaints body, introduced, then the moment anybody published us, there would be a complaint put into the regulator. It didn't matter whether they won it or lost it. I mean, essentially, the complainant virtually always lost. But again, the process was the punishment. So we found it really hard to get the word out. Now, what changed that in the last few years has been the advent of one, GB News, two, Talk TV. So people who were willing to put their heads above the parapet and take some risks. And latterly also the Reform UK. So once you had a political party that was going up in the polls and was saying net zero was a mistake, again, it became much harder for people to ignore us. From the time of the last general election, things really have changed. Suddenly, it's really quite easy. Other newspapers are wanting to talk to us more. There's much more media attention. People are just paying more attention to net zero as a policy. And of course, we've had the Conservatives saying, well, they're walking back from it a bit, aren't they? They're saying we're not going to do it by 2050. The 2050 is impossible. Does that mean walking back completely and saying we're not going to do it? Well, that remains to be seen. But I think people are assuming that they will sound the retreat at some point in the near future.
And do you feel that the populace generally, apart from the media and government, that they are changing their view, that there isn't such a sort of blanket acceptance as there used to be, that they're questioning, particularly, for example, the one that made me laugh recently was the insistence on us having solar panels while at the same time trying to block the sun. Do you think that sort of opened people's eyes?
I think just the fact that people are talking about this in the media and questioning it has enabled the public to sort of get a more balanced view of it. And the climate change, the net zero policy has led to all sorts of lunacies, if you like the thing of dimming the sun while trying to promote solar power. For example, we build wind farms in the seas off Scotland, but it's virtually impossible to get the electricity to market. But we keep building them because that's what the climate change cult demands, that you just build wind farms everywhere, regardless of the costs, regardless of whether you've got the network infrastructure in place. Just do it. And so, yeah, all these things happen, and now at least we can talk about them, and when it comes to solar power, we can laugh about them as well.
Well, when you say you can talk about them, how about official bodies, scientific bodies? Because we saw during COVID that science decided this, that, and the other, and that anybody that questioned the narrative was closed down. Are you finding that with net zero questioning?
Yeah, that's been the case pretty much from the start. Um, when I guess this goes back to about 2010, there was a scandal called ClimateGate, which some of your listeners might remember. There was a load of emails leaked onto the internet from the Climatic Research Unit at the University of East Anglia, and these showed that they were not behaving as scientists. They were behaving, if you like, as cult people trying to silence opposition, sort of, meting out justice to any journal that published any skeptical views and that sort of thing. So at that point, it became quite clear that science had been corrupted. And the very sad thing about it was that the official bodies of science, if you like, the Royal Society, the Royal Society of Chemistry, the Royal Society of Physics, the Royal Academy of Engineering, all these people who you would expect to behave as the conscience of science and to stand up and say that there was a problem, they went with the green flow too. Whether that was because they were actually on board with the cult, or whether it was just there was a lot of money flowing their way from the government that was at risk if they spoke out, I don't know. But we have tried really very hard and are still trying really hard to get these bodies to engage, not to agree that we're right, but to have a rational discussion about it. But they won't even do that. I wrote to one of the engineering magazines. So this was a professional magazine for engineers a couple of weeks ago. And I said, okay, you've written an article about Kemi Badenoch saying that net zero by 2050 is impossible. And you've said that's completely wrong. I'd like to write an article saying why it's completely right. And they said no. They said you can write as something showing how net zero could be done cheaper, but you cannot question net zero. Yeah, so this is essentially a religious view, isn't it? It's like that is the article of faith. We must do net zero. You're not allowed to question it, and this has gone on for so long now. It's going to end badly. Net zero inevitably will fail, and at that point, these bodies, the Royal Society, the Royal Academy of Engineering, are going to look very bad indeed. I think heads will have to roll, frankly.
Well, yes, this seems to have happened with COVID, where obviously loads of people are not taking vaccines, any sort of vaccine, forget the COVID one. They're not trusting doctors. They're certainly not trusting pharmaceutical companies. So do you think the same thing will happen with the science organizations, certainly the climate ones?
Yeah, I think people don't, to the extent that people think about climate science. I think a lot of people do realize that it is corrupt, and that what these people say has to be taken with a pinch of salt, at least. There are so many stories. I mean, so here's a little anecdote. For many years now, almost all scientific papers have used a particular carbon dioxide emissions scenario called RCP 8.5, which is widely recognized to be completely bonkers. I mean, essentially, it assumes that we give up on gas, we go back to coal, that the population soars, that nothing sensible is there at all. But they use this, almost every single paper uses this because it gives them headlines saying we're all going to go to hell in a handcart. So scientists are doing this. I think probably they're probably not in the cult. They're doing it because giving results that are scary gets headlines, and headlines gets them grants. The whole thing has become corrupted. And yeah, there's a huge job of work to do to get science back onto an even keel, but that's somebody else's job.
And in the meantime, we have a government that does seem to be very much invested in the net zero cult, as you say, more so than the last government. When it comes to, Ed Miliband's plan to spend, he's spending 21 billion, I think it is, on some carbon capture project, rather than just planting trees, for example, which could do the same or better. Is this the sort of thing that you have been looking into? And if so, what have you found?
Okay, so our focus for the last since COVID really has been very much on the cost of net zero. So that means energy prices and the cost of renewables and what renewables are doing to bills on the one hand, and the sort of the wider net zero project. So should you install a heat pump? Will it save you money? Is there any ever hope of you saving it money? So that's what we've been focusing on, and the answers are pretty appalling. I mean, I think the thing I think that your listeners need to understand is that almost everything they're being told by government and by Whitehall and by officials as well about what net zero is going to cost them is essentially false. It's untrue. The government and Whitehall are the main sources of disinformation about what net zero means for people. And I think that people are beginning to see this. We've heard now, I mean, it was 2017 that the government said, hooray, net zero is going to be really cheap because the cost of wind farms is going to fall through the floor. And they said, you've got to wait a little bit. But come 2025, actually, they said wind farms will have fallen in price by half by then. And we can see now the wind farms coming on stream in 20. Well, there is only one major offshore wind farm that will come on stream in 2025. It's called Murray West, and it costs just the same amount as they did back in 2017, pretty well. The costs have come down slightly, but not a lot. So it's all a pack of lies. And it means that your electricity isn't going to get cheaper. The price of electricity has been going up since 2002 when we decided we were going to start putting in wind farms. They try to blame gas prices for the high electricity prices, and that's not true either. Over those 25 years, for the first 20 years of that, so 2002 to 2020, say 18 years, gas prices were flat and electricity prices kept going up. And that's because of renewables. Okay, because essentially we've built two electricity systems. We've built this new unreliable wind-powered electricity system, but we've had to keep the old one for when the wind doesn't blow. So you have two electricity systems. So of course it's more expensive. The only saving you make is the fuel. So you only save money by doing this if gas is extremely expensive. And during the energy price crisis, during the start of the Ukraine war, yes, renewables saved us some money for about 18 months, and now it's back to costing us money. So it will cost us money all the time unless we have a war. So let's try not to start any wars, and then yeah, we'll be better off.
So going forward, are you saying that electricity is going to continue to be expensive for us in our homes? It's going to be expensive and possibly more expensive with
Yeah.
the introduction of more renewables.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually going to get worse. The cost of the electricity system is going to accelerate for various reasons. One is that thing I talked before about building wind farms in Scotland where we don't have the grid capacity to get the electricity to market. Well, we've got lots more wind farms coming on in Scotland, and so we're going to have to pay them to switch off. That's one factor. Another factor is that when it's windy and sunny at the same time, so spring and autumn is quite a common thing. We produce more electricity than we need. So wind farms are going to have to start switching off, which means every new wind farm we put on the grid will deliver less power than the older ones. So again, that means your unit cost of electricity is going to go up. There is a major question over whether it is anything more than a fantasy, because at the moment we sense that renewables investors are getting quite nervous. Investors will be going, well, Reform is saying they're going to shut net zero down, and if anybody goes ahead and builds any more wind farms, they're potentially going to lose out because if you build now, they're saying you don't really deserve compensation. So yeah, I think we're going to see a wholesale retreat now, and but the longer term question then is, okay, how do we get back to cheap electricity? Because we need cheap electricity. So if we just stop building new wind farms, well, we're stuck with electricity where it is now. We have the most expensive electricity in the world. Um, and we will lose what is left of our manufacturing industry. So the question then becomes, how do we get back to cheap electricity? That's something that I'm now starting to think about quite a lot. It's going to be extremely difficult, but the objective has to be to close the wind farms because we need to get back to having one electricity system and not two.
Well, what about nuclear? Is this something that you're looking into as a cheap form of electricity?
Yeah, nuclear is potentially cheap. It's grossly overregulated. Um, but my belief is that it can be cheap if it was sensibly regulated. The problem that nuclear has is that nuclear needs to run constantly. It needs to run 24/7. It has very high build costs. And to get those build costs back, you need to run constantly. The problem with that is we have a lot of wind on the system, which, as I said, at times is producing more electricity than we need. So if you're going to build nuclear, what gets switched off at those times? Is it the wind farms or is it the nuclear? It's very bad for the engineering of the nuclear, and it's very bad for its economics. So you have to switch off the wind farms, but that makes them even more expensive. So there's a chicken and egg situation here. Essentially, I don't think nuclear is going to get built in very large capacity in the UK until the wind farms are gone. But that's the way we have to go. It's close the wind farms. Okay, let's get some gas-fired power stations up and running quickly to fill in the gap because we have a major problem there, which I could tell you about in a minute. But yeah, eventually then you move to nuclear, and then you have a cheap and if not net zero carbon, but it will be a low carbon electricity system because you would still need gas-fired power stations for if you like peak when demand is at a peak, but you can do a lot of it through nuclear. The thing I was going to mention about we have all our gas-fired power stations are really old. Most of them are nearly 30 years old, and you don't get many gas-fired power stations over 30 years old. So we are going to have major problems in 2 or 3 years' times because they will want to close. Can we keep them open? Well, if you give them some subsidies, they might say, okay, we'll stay open. But then will they actually work when you switch them on? It's hard to know. We are looking at potentially quite serious problems by about 2028. And but again, nobody wants to build any new gas-fired power stations because there's so much wind on the grid. We've got into a real mess here.
We really have, although it seems to be a bit even messier in Spain, Portugal, France, where they had a complete utter blackout for well, it was a day.
24 hours or so, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, are we close to that?
Yes, I mean it's the same. We have the same problem. So they at the time their grid went down, they were running on about 80% renewables. at about the same point. So were we. Now, why they went down and we didn't, I don't know. They had a fault that then propagated suddenly. Um, all grids get faults. The thing is, when you have a lot of renewables on the system, there is a risk that fault can propagate quickly throughout the system and take the whole system down. Now, without fossil fuel power stations on the grid, that's a risk. Now they can do things to try and mitigate that risk. They have you can put flywheels on the system, or your batteries can sometimes help to stabilize the grid. But it clearly didn't work in Spain. It seems to have worked here at the moment. But yes, no, there is a major risk, and this is something we've been on about for 5 years. Um, Saying there is a real lack of what the engineers call grid inertia, and that there is a real risk of blackouts.
Yeah.
But again, it's a cult. They don't care. They're not listening. They think we've just got to do net zero, whatever, and we'll deal with the problems as they come along.
And
But
part
people
of
people died in Spain. It was six people
really,
died because their medical devices at home
oh,
didn't work.
yes.
And what happens to a society when the grid goes down is quite scary. Nobody could spend money in the shops. The
Yes.
shelves were empty by the end of the day. If they hadn't have got the grid up and running the next day, I mean, you're talking societal breakdown. It's quite
Mhm.
scary.
Yeah, just 24 hours. It's amazing. How do you see things panning out in the next year or so? I mean, we've just said that there seems to be a change of mood in the media and government, as well as in just across the populace. Do you see things accelerating now, particularly because reform has taken over so many of the councils? Are we going to see an overturning of the whole net zero cult, or do you think it's going to fight back like the transgender people have been fighting back recently?
I think the fight will continue for a while. I don't think the reform councils can do very much. I mean, energy is a national policy area. They can try to delay, wind and solar farms being built and that sort of thing, and they can sack some climate change officers or something. But it's pretty peripheral. The energy bills are going to be they're going to come back to haunt Keir Starmer. He said he's going to save us £300 a year, but essentially, most times the energy price cap is reviewed, prices are going to go up. I think they're actually the next price cap will be down. I think the one after that probably not, and then the one from December, January 2026 will be up again, and it will keep going up because underneath it, the gas prices go up and down, but you have this effect of the renewable subsidies go up every time. The cost of upgrading the network for net zero goes up every time. The carbon tax goes up most of the time. And so energy prices are going to go up. And Keir Starmer is going to have this every 3 months. The world is going to round on him and remind him that he said bills were going to come down.
And what about the energy companies? Are they skimming off the top, or is it genuinely, as many of them are saying, they've got all these extra expenses with the renewables? Or is there a bit of a mix?
Okay, so the energy suppliers, the people who you deal with at home, their profits are regulated. So that's part of the energy price cap calculation, and it's actually pretty tight to tell the truth. Most businesses would look at that and go, that's not nearly enough profit. So no, they're not skimming. I mean, further up the energy supply chain, people do make big money some of the time. So oil companies make big money. So during the energy price crisis, they made an absolute packet because they had bought their oil and gas, on the futures market at very low prices, and then suddenly the spot prices shot up. So they make an absolute fortune. When it comes down, when the prices come down again, they lose money. I mean, that's what it is running an oil company, and um, you know, people probably shouldn't worry about that. The wind farms made huge money because, of course, most wind and solar in this country is on an older subsidy scheme called the renewables obligation, which is essentially that arrangement is you sell in the market for what you can get, and we'll give you a subsidy on top. So the market price shot through the air, and then they kept their subsidy on top. So these guys made an absolute packet. And frankly, they should have been windfall taxed. I mean, I think they are now. Now that they've had the big gain, I think we are subsequently taxing them a little bit extra. But yeah, the big money they've kept. And there's another little scandal there that a lot of these wind farms, of course, the essentially the profits are being diverted overseas anyway. So they sell to uh, they're part of big groups, and they sell to sister companies who trade the electricity in continental Europe, but they sell it at a very low price. I think they were allowed to do this when we were part of the EU, and of course the arrangements stayed in place. So all those huge profits are off in Europe somewhere rather than in the exchequer, paying taxes here, which is a sad state of affairs.
Yeah, it certainly is, given the amount of tax that we're losing already. So, what can viewers, listeners do if they are sick to death of the whole net zero problem and they are concerned about the price of their electricity going up? What can they do in order not to feel completely helpless and angry about this situation?
Um, there isn't a lot you can do outside the democratic process, I think. So, I think writing to your MP and saying that this is a major concern to you is important. I mean, MPs, if they get a lot of letters from people on the same subject and that have not clearly been written by the same person in different guises, if it's not a form letter, as it were, they will pay attention. They're very sensitive to what is concerning people. I think so. If people write and say, look, I know it's nothing to do with the gas price because the gas price has come down. It is renewables. What are you going to do about it? That is probably the thing that will have the most effect. We need people to vote for parties that are opposed to net zero. And at the moment that's reform, but the Conservatives, as I said before, are coming round. And I think if there are ways to encourage them by, sort of, I don't know, if you're on social media, you can say, hooray, that the Conservatives are getting there on net zero. That, yeah, it might have an effect. But yeah, I guess in your day-to-day life, there's not a lot you can do except don't fall for heat pumps and don't fall for EVs. It's a huge mistake.
And I'm guessing that, as with so many other subjects, it's time that we spoke out. I mean, you were saying that it's difficult to get the organizations to listen to you, but in individual conversations with friends and family who are 100% pro the whole net zero agenda, it's probably time that we speak our truth in even in a small way, would you say?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. Because it is a cult, it's very difficult to rationalize people out of a position into which they didn't rationalize themselves in the first place. So talking to them rationally about it and explaining that, the cost of electricity's gone up while the gas price hasn't, they don't actually really care. It'll go in one ear and out the other. And they believe this very, very sincerely. It's an article of faith for them, and faith, it touches something in the subconscious. So, actually getting down into their subconscious is really hard to do. The thing that will affect people is as they feel economic pain. We've seen some very interesting survey data, global surveys of attitudes to climate change. If across the world, if you ask people, um, um, are you worried about climate change? And they'll say yes, 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 definitely. And in countries like the UK, they'll say yeah, yeah, really. And then you say, how much are you willing to pay to stop it? And they'll go, oh, nothing. So, yeah, so um, that reality check of do you really think this, let's come back into the conscious level. Do you really think that? Well, no, of course I don't think that. It's yeah, that's just my religion. so um yeah, reminding people of the cost, though, I think may be a way to get them to concentrate on it a little bit. That's what you've got to do for your friends and neighbors. But if you start talking, I don't know, climate science or global warming, not a chance.
Thank you, Andrew. Great to speak to you. This has been Andrew Montford from Net Zero Watch. Keep watching, keep liking, keep subscribing. See you next week.